South Africa just posted its biggest arms export this year ever. $550 million, 42 countries, weapons, ammunition, armored vehicles, aircraft, and the people buying most of it? Europe, Germany, Turkey, Estonia, queuing up to buy shells from a factory at the bottom of Africa. But here's what nobody's saying yet. That arms story connects to a $40 billion plan out of Lagos that could change how this entire continent eats and fuels itself, and to a visa threat out of London aimed at any African country that dares ask for slave reparations. Same week, all three stories pulling the same wire. Stay with me. Okay, African arms. For most of modern history, they have been actually one direction. That military hardware flows when Africa is involved into it. European weapons, American weapons, Russian weapons, Chinese weapons. African armies, some of the world's biggest buyers and some of the continent's smallest builders. That has changed. South Africa just posted $550 million in defense exports in 2025, nearly 3 times what it sold the year before. 582 permits, 42 countries, numbers confirmed by the NCACC, South Africa's Arms Committee, just this past week. The biggest buyers, not in Africa, in Europe. Germany alone ordered $180 million worth of artillery. Turkey, 35,000 rounds. Estonia and Australia, both in the queue. Europe alone took 42% of everything South Africa exported. Germany, Turkey, Estonia, Australia. Now, these are NATO-linked countries in the middle of a life security global crisis, coming to the southern tip of Africa to restock their shelves. But Europe is just one half of the story. Look inside Africa right now. Kenya just took 34 South African armored vehicles, Ghana 30, Malawi 15, Cameroon 11. Aircraft went to Iraq, the DRC, Mozambique, and the UAE. African militaries buying from another African country, not Russia, not France, not China. Pretoria. That's a structural shift, not just a transaction. You see, when you sell someone an armored vehicle, you become their maintenance partner, their spare parts supplier, their trainer. For the next 20 years, South Africa is quietly threading itself into the defense architecture of multiple African states at once. Now, here is the part of the story that almost never comes up. South Africa didn't stumble into this capability. It was built deliberately by African engineers who had a specific problem: soldiers dying from landmines in active conflict zones, and had no off-the-shelf solution to buy. So they built one. Vehicles called the Hippo, the Caspi, the Mamba. V-shaped hulls that deflect a blast outward and down, away from the soldiers sitting inside the vehicle. Designed, tested, and refined on African soil, in African conditions, by African hands. Now, the world didn't give these engineers the blueprint. They wrote it. Now, fast forward to Iraq. IEDs are destroying American Humvees. Soldiers are being unalived. The Pentagon needs a solution very fast. They went looking for one and found it in South Africa's 40-year-old war playbook. The US Marine Corps said so in their own publication. The design of the V-hold MRAP, the MRAPs you have today in Ukraine and any other major war area that the US is involved, that design was taken from South Africa. The Cougar MRAP, one of America's primary vehicles in Iraq, traces its design origin directly to a South African manufacturer. So, African engineering solved one of the biggest military problems in the 21st century. And now in 2026, that same industry is supplying 42 countries, including the most powerful military alliance on earth. So African engineers identified the problem, built the solution, and the world's most powerful military eventually came looking for it. So what happens when someone looks at Africa's food and energy crisis? You see, one man in Lagos just answered that question. He put $40 billion on the table to prove it. Now, Nigeria has some of the largest crude oil reserves on the planet. For decades, it drilled that oil, shipped it overseas for it to be refined, then bought it back as petrol and diesel at import prices. Same country, same oil, living poor, coming back expensive. That's the same story with food. Farmers across the continent importing fertilizer every year. Billions of dollars leaving Africa every year to buy something Africa had the raw materials to make at home. Just days ago, one man decided that story ends now. Now, a few days ago, a man, Aliko Dangote, walked into the boardroom of Afreximbank and put on the table a plan he called a Vision 2030. The cover on that plan, $40 billion, not aid, not money from the World Bank. One private African man, one plan, moving this week. The Dangote refinery in Lagos is already the largest refinery in Africa and the single largest refinery in the whole world. According to the new plan, he wants to double that refinery's capacity from 650,000 barrels per day to 1.4 million barrels per day. This will instantly stop Nigeria from importing fuel and makes Nigeria a net importer, just like Saudi Arabia, just like Qatar. The expansion of the fertilizer plan, which is already in place in Nigeria, that fertilizer plan is already the largest single-train fertilizer plan in the whole world. He wants to quadruple its production from 3 million tons per year to 12 million tons, enough to supply a serious share of the entire continent's agricultural needs. The 2030 revenue target is $100 billion a year. Now, think about what 12 million tons of fertilizer actually means. Right now, a smallholder farmer in Zambia is calculating whether she can afford to plant this season. Her supply chain runs through Russia, through Belarus, through commodity markets she has zero control over. When those markets cracked in 2022 after the Russia-Ukraine war, fertilizer prices across Africa spiked hard. And that made farmers to use less fertilizer, which resulted to less harvest, which later resulted to much expensive food for people who were already on the edge. Dangote is trying to cut that chain, produce here, price it for African farmers, keep it steady. Not a conference, not a fund, a factory that's already standing. And the money behind this funding isn't coming from a Western bank with conditions attached. It comes from Afreximbank, an African multilateral institution backed by African governments. So this is African money, African institution, African industry. Now, the honest question: if one entity controls the continent's dominant refinery and its dominant fertilizer supply, that's an enormous concentration. What protects ordinary farmers if business interests and national interests diverge one day? You see, Dangote's track record of finishing what he starts is genuinely rare. You see, the buildings exist, but the most powerful version of this is one where his success opens a new blueprint and not a monopoly. Which Africa do we build? The one where exceptional individuals solve the big problem, or the one where the capacity is so distributed that no failure can bring it down? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. You see, both stories, South Africa's engineers, Dangote's factories, are about people who looked at a broken system and decided to build their way out. This week, we found out that at least one part of the old system noticed and responded. First week of April, this week, Reform UK, a UK political party, puts a proposal on table. Any country that officially pursues slavery reparations from Britain sets up a national commission, files a UN motion, brings a legal claim, faces visa restriction on its citizens entering the UK. Nigeria was named, Ghana was named, 17 other African and Caribbean countries were named. Now, the UK government distanced itself immediately. Party proposal, not current law. That matters. But the fact that it was proposed publicly, seriously in 2026, tells you everything about the temperature of this conversation right now. Here is the context. Just last year, the UN passed a resolution formally recognizing the transatlantic slave trade as a grave crime against humanity. Not binding law, but a multilateral framework giving African and Caribbean governments solid ground to pursue reparations through commissions, UN mechanisms, and legal filings. The Reform UK proposal will treat exactly those steps as the trigger for punishing those countries' citizens. And who actually gets punished? Not ministers, not policy makers. The student applying for a UK study visa, the nurse, the engineer, the family visiting someone, people with nothing to do with decision, paying the price for it. Anyway, you see, a fair analysis means putting both arguments on the table. Reform UK's position. Now, they say the UK have contributed through decades of aid, trade, and migration access. They see reparations as open-ended financial claims with no clear endpoint. Now, you can challenge that. Many do with strong reasoning, but you need to know what the argument is to understand what's actually happening. Now, some analysts think this is mostly performance. A party playing to a domestic audience, never about immigration. You see, the government's quick distancing supports that reading. But when a bad idea gets rehearsed enough times in enough serious rooms, it stops sounding extreme. Pay attention to what gets proposed, even when it doesn't pass. You see, what this proposal actually tells us is that the reparations movement has gotten organized enough to threaten people, national commissions, UN motions, legal frameworks, coalition building across Africa and the Caribbean. When someone proposes a punishment for asking a question, that question has gotten close to something real. If this movement is no longer about a check, if it's about who holds moral authority in global institutions, about rewriting narratives and still shape economic relationships today, what does justice look like that actually moves forward? I don't have a clean answer, but that's the question worth carrying this week. Now, here is the thread. South Africa's engineers built a solution the world's most powerful military came looking for. And the money from that solution went to manufacturers in the United States. The idea came from Africa. The windfall landed somewhere else. Dangote built a refinery. And the first fight is with oil marketers protecting an import model that depended on Nigeria staying dependent. Then African governments build a legal framework for reparations. And the immediate response is a proposal to punish their citizens for using it. Same pattern every time, not a conspiracy, a structure. What's genuinely different right now this week is that the structure is genuinely becoming more visible. People are naming it, building around it. South Africa isn't just selling shells. It's embedding itself into African defense systems. Dangote isn't building a refinery. He's trying to own a supply chain that held Africa's agriculture hostage. African governments aren't just asking for reparations. They are building a legal architecture to pursue it systematically. So the rising isn't the story anymore. What gets built around the rising is the story. You see, Africa doesn't need permission to be powerful. It never did. The question is whether what's going on right now, these factories, these institutions, these legal strategies, is being built to hold the power inside the continent, or whether history just keeps rhyming. If one of these stories hit different to you, send it to someone who needs to hear it. I'm Asongwe Luis, you're watching Africa Today, and this is the Strategic Lens. See you in my next video. Bye.